time it is, ladies. Oh, hang on, I don't think the recording had started yet. But do you know what time it is? It's September, which means it's back to school season, which means it's time for PTA meetings to start back up. And I am so excited to tell you about all the good work being done by and below our president, local mother of however many, and all-around dynamite gal, Beverly. Ah, bless her pea-pickin' heart. I am so excited. But, of course, not as excited as I am to catch you up on the latest book club activities, because that is what I'm here for. That is my purpose. I am the president of this book club in the same way that Beverly, bless her pea-pickin' heart, is the president of the PTA. I can only aspire to do as well as her someday. So, here goes. Book club. Rebecca Langley. She is the protagonist of the book that we read this week in book club, a club in which we read books such as this one. Now, Rebecca is a woman who we assume is in her late 20s, early 30s, not because of the contextual evidence of the book suggesting as much, but because that's the narrative we ourselves would like to live vicariously through literature. And she's lonely. I mean, she has friends and everything, but she doesn't have a man in her life, so she's lonely. No man means no future, means no purpose. I mean, I don't necessarily think you need to have a man to have a purpose. I personally find purpose in my son. No, wait, he's a man. In Hank. No, he's a man too. In a really nifty organization that allows me to work with great people within my community for the benefit of the public school system. I mean, really, truly, PTA does help keep me going sometimes. Usually this time of year, I'd be taking Jeremy back to school shopping, which I love, don't get me wrong. Nothing gets me hot and bothered like a good scented pencil grip. But he's always out doing his last hurrah summer whatevers with his friend Jasper, so instead I'm buying school supplies for all the children through the annual PTA bake sale. We usually do the bake sale a few weeks into the school year, but we had a special request this time around. Isn't that exciting? Like a secret mission. The Gopher Glen Elementary Art Department came to our humble organization and asked us if we could buy them some more black markers, specifically black markers. They said the rest of the markers are fine. They're at that point where they're not quite worn to the point where they don't work anymore, but just worn enough that they're not fun to use anymore. But the black markers are something special because somehow they get lost disproportionately more than the others. And every once in a while, one of the kids will find one in the deepest, darkest depths of the community marker Rubbermaid, and they'll get real rowdy. They will wrestle each other for the marker. Not scrappy playground wrestling, no. Official match-style wrestling. They have little uniforms and everything. And the champion is deemed worthy of wielding the single black marker for the remainder of the class period. Marker deficit is perhaps the single most serious problem among youth in America today, and we shall combat it as we combat all other issues through the sacred art of the bake sale. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, hold your horses, clasp your Clydesdales close to your heart for just a second. Why so much focus on bake sales? Isn't the purpose of a PTA to form connections between parents, teachers, and local government to allow parents to give their kids the care they need? And based on a quick Google search of what is a PTA supposed to do, I would assume that's correct. But Beverly, bless her pea-pickin' heart, said she could handle dealing with all the big guys on her own, and we should focus our efforts on whatever menial tasks she can come up with to keep us out of her way, so to speak. So our main and only priority is bake sales. I mean, not my only priority, of course. I also have this lovely book club I'm supposed to be telling you about, starring our protagonist. I would never forget Rebecca Langer. Becky is looking for love, but never quite finding it until she sees the flyer that turns it all around. It reads, "Looking for love, but never quite finding it? Turn that all around at our Looking for Love and Quite Finding It convention." She needed not read further because she knew this was the event for her. And then she needed to read further to get the event details. Serendipity can only do so much. And a good flyer can do so much. I mean, look at our bake sale. Gretchen, one of our most enthusiastic and well-intentioned members, volunteered to handle our advertising. And of course, we immediately gave her the go-ahead, much to the much to the chagrin of one of our new recruits, Justin. He said he had a degree in graphic design and access to bulk color printing at an affordable price, but Gretchen is so darn enthusiastic, and she has Microsoft Word 2010. How handy is that? I'm looking at the finished product right now, and I think it's just super. But of course our new friend had a thing or two to say about it, which means that I had a thing or two to write about it as PTA secretary. He said, and I'm referring to my notes on this one, "Why would you align the text like that? All the script is jammed into the top left corner. Why would you use a clip art animation on a document you intended to print? If you were going to choose a terrible font, why couldn't you at least use Comic Sans, which has been proven easier for people with dyslexia to read? Why would you choose Joker Man of all things?" I didn't understand a lick of it, but I think he was being unnecessarily unkind to poor Gretchen. So I said, "Would you speak to your wife like that?" And he said, "I don't have a wife." And I said, "Would you speak to your husband like that? Because I am awoke, as the kids say." And he said, "I don't have a husband." And I said, "Well, who exactly is taking care of your child? The PTA is for parents. Who is doing the parenting?" And then he stormed out. Was that a little harsh? Looking back at that conversation written out, it sounds a little harsh. But that's probably just because plain text can't capture my inflection. I just can't stand it when people get so swept up in their own activities that they can't take the time to be with their children. Now, when you're a single woman like Rebecca Langford, you can get swept up in whatever you want. Like singles minglers. Singles mingles? Singlers minglers? She goes to a singler mingles and she is terrified. So many singles, so many mingles, but she learns fast how to put herself out there. She chats about yoga. She sits at tables with other people already sitting at them. She dances half-heartedly to the cha-cha slide. There are lots of ways to put oneself out there. Some do it through dating or dancing or sitting. Some do it through baking. Each time we set out a tray of goodies at a bake sale, are we not also setting out a little piece of ourselves? It's terrifying hoping that some stranger will like that piece of you enough to exchange their own federal currency for it. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with that problem so much because the only people who showed up to the bake sale were in PTA. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with that problem so much because the only people who showed up to the bake sale were PTA members. I'm not entirely sure what went wrong. We did everything in our power to get the word out. Sometimes words just aren't enough, even when they are printed on Gretchen's lovely posters. Although through some crazy random happenstance, we all ended up bringing bars. I can't make this stuff up. No muffins, no cookies, just sheet pans upon sheet pans of various cereals fused together with marshmallow paste. So we make our way around these tables. All these tables, so many tables full of bars, saying things like, "Ooh, who made the Rice Krispies with the rainbow marshmallows? Beth, was that you? Well, they look yummy. And Hillary, you have got to give me the recipe for your caramel check scotcheroos. It's from the Betty Crocker website. I never would have guessed. They look so yummy. And I never would have thought to use mini wheats like that, Barbara Ann. Could it get any more yummy?" But we would never know. We would never know if things could be more yummy, because there were only enough baked goods for each person to buy one tray. Each of us had a responsibility to purchase someone else's bars, someone else's work, to take a couple of hours of someone else's livelihood into our hands, to savor each sweet bite of their effort as if it were our own. We would eat whole trays of bars alone in the darkness, telling ourselves we couldn't let them go stale, couldn't let these shrapnels of our peers to go to waste. We do this for each other and hope that somebody else is doing the same for us, but we never know. We never know. But Kimberly does. Kimberly knows because she took home her own bars. They were a little farther back, a little harder to see, and by the time everyone else had taken their pick, only she remained, and only hers remained. She said it was fine, told us it was fine, told herself it was fine. She told some combination of us and herself and the universe that it was fine, that it wasn't that her bars were bad, some things just slipped through the cracks. Kimberly buys her bars, sets them on the passenger seat of her minivan, fixes her bun in the rear view, and drives to the soccer field to pick up her sons. She waits in the pickup line for a few minutes, again checking her hair, glancing at the bars in the seat next to her. She realizes they had slid a few inches to the right from the mild inertia of the trip. She realizes that they had traveled so much farther than that. This was just more visible than the few blocks between the school and the soccer field. She realizes she had a text from her husband saying he had already picked up the kids on his way home from work. She drives home silently in an unanticipated isolation. It's not a bad isolation, just one that she hadn't scheduled into her day. She has so much scheduled isolation. This one catches her off guard. She moves her bars to her kitchen counter, an even greater change in distance, but a change she has control over. Her husband is in the bathroom. Her sons are playing a soccer game on the PlayStation. She goes through an evening routine so routine she forgets she exists for a few hours. Before she goes to bed, she sees the bars. Still on her counter. Still covered in shrink wrap. Still undeniably hers. She thinks of all the other mothers at home, sharing their bars with their families, sharing their responsibility over someone else's time and effort with the groups that are their responsibilities, their time, their effort. She considers eating the bars she spent so much time on, or really so little time in the grand scheme of her life, or really, in the grand scheme of her life, so much time. She had worked hard that day. She deserves a treat, but it's different, having that responsibility over yourself instead of over somebody else. That's something we forget about sometimes. That's something we forget about a lot of times. It's something a lot of us never remember at all. She goes to bed without her husband. She wakes up without him too, but she fills in the time she had been asleep with the image of him sneaking into bed and out again, always careful not to wake her. She convinces herself that this narrative is true because it is, because it always has been. She stumbles into the kitchen, her bleary eyes attempting to make out the time on the microwave clock. 9:04, it reads, which she translates to mean either 8:59 or 9:07. She had never checked to see if the clock was correct. It just seemed like the sort of thing that would always be a little off. Either way, she had overslept and was again unexpectedly alone. Her husband was at work, her sons on the bus, just her and the bars. And she wasn't sure if those made her feel more or less alone. She looks at the tray of pseudo-baked goods. Had it been that far from the toaster last night? Hadn't it been a few inches closer to the bananas? Was the shrink wrap always so crumpled on the side? How many bars had she even made? Were any missing? Maybe her husband had enjoyed one before bed, or maybe one of her sons had snuck one into his lunchbox. A part of her thinks to ask her husband about it when he gets back, whether he tried one, whether he liked it. But that would be strange, wouldn't it? He would think she was being obsessive, or worse yet, he wouldn't think anything at all. He would give a casual answer to what he would wrongly assume was a casual question, and she would judge her entire self-worth off of a comment he hadn't even thought to put any thought into. But what if she learns that nobody had tasted any after all? That nobody had been enticed by that piece of her? What then? Did they think they weren't supposed to touch it? That it wasn't for them? It hadn't been, not originally, but she was opening it up to them now. Maybe they didn't want it. Maybe they didn't even notice it was there. Hadn't noticed there was anything for them to notice at all. But she noticed. Oh, she noticed. Boy, did she notice. So the bake sale went great. Since everything sold, we had more than enough money to buy the art department the markers they asked for, so we surprised them with more than they ever could have dreamed of. All the fancy Crayola packs, tropical, metallic, silly scents, tricolor, window, crystal window, those fancy multicultural ones, just the works. We dropped them off during the second grade art class, and the kiddos just tore right in. And their teacher, Ms. McKenney, was speechless and shaking and a little bit visibly upset. She went off about how most of the markers weren't compatible with the mediums they use, and how most of the packs didn't even have the black markers they needed in the first place, and how, if anything, all the new colors would just make it more difficult to find the few black markers they do have left. And then she was cut off because one of the kids stood on a chair and shouted, "I got one!" and the other kids mobbed around her as she donned a referee's uniform, recited the rules of amateur wrestling, and started drawing up a tournament bracket in something vaguely cherry-scented. I felt a little bad as Ms. McKenney rushed over to settle the kids down, or at least make sure they had the proper protective gear on. Oh well, at least the kiddos have more opportunities to make art, even if they have to fight to make the art they want to make. Yeesh, that was quite a tangent, wasn't it? I mean, I know that's kind of my thing, but yeesh. I just got so swept up in my secretarial notes. I do take quite detailed notes, in case you can't tell. Back to book club, one last time. Rebecca Langard meets a man at the Looking for Love and Whatever event. And wouldn't you know it, they fall in love. Meant to be, or so she tells herself. And so he tells himself, and so we all tell ourselves, as we hope that a work of fiction can prove to us that meant to be is a real concept. The two date for years, doing everything a couple is supposed to do, never really communicating that they're only doing it because it's what they've been told to do their entire lives, not because they're genuinely infatuated with each other. The love will come, they tell themselves with every passing day, and we tell ourselves with every turn of the page. And then they get married and live happily ever after. Overall, I thought it was a delightful read. I know it's just a basic romance novel, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with wanting a basic romance. There is nothing wrong with wanting. There is nothing wrong. There is nothing. And then Joni started analyzing perceptions of love, and Helen started analyzing perceptions of perception, and Heather, I don't really know, she probably talked about kombucha or something. I didn't really have my head in the game for the analysis part of the meeting because I got another PTA email from Beverly, bless her pea-pickin' heart, that said something along the lines of, "Fellow mothers, great work this week. This is only the beginning of the great plans I have in store for us." Anywho, that book was One for the Money by Janet Ivanovich. And the theme? Love, obviously. I should really have a prize for those of you who guessed these titles correctly. If you got that right, stop by sometime and I will present you with this leftover bar. I just have one left. I don't remember who made it, but somebody did, so it's a part of somebody else. And I guess because I bought it, it's a part of me too. And now it can be a part of you. And then it will be a part of nothing. what happens to those pieces of us when their physical manifestations cease to be? What happens? Find out next time on Momcast. I mean, you won't find out that specifically, but you'll find out something about books or goss or whatever, and that's kind of the same thing, right? Alright, that's it for this week. Say hi to the kids for me. Bye-bye. Momcast is written, voiced, and produced by Lily Indy. Follow Brenda on Twitter and Instagram at MomcastPodcast, and tune in every other Sunday on your favorite podcast platform, so long as that platform is here, where this podcast is.